everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Such an honor. I am joined here today by three amazing panelists. We have Chai Sururi, Gillian Caldwell, who should be joining us shortly, virtually, and Juliette De Villard. Hi, Gillian. Can you hear us okay? Hello. And this panel is going to be about storytelling and climate change, as you know. We're going to be probing into how we as a global society can use storytelling to share and communicate values, help to make sense of our lives, and promote empathy and cooperation. So all the best things. We're also going to be asking questions such as, can climate movements tap into the power of storytelling to promote change? And how could effective storytelling help us share real human experiences, win hearts and minds, and inspire action? And so onto the panel. I'm just going to introduce you all quite briefly. Firstly, we have Chai, who's an indigenous climate activist from the Brazilian Amazon. She leads numerous indigenous youth movements and is also an executive producer of the award-winning documentary, The Territory, which you guys should all try and see if you haven't already. For her, defending the forest is a family issue. Her father is a great chief and her mother is an environmental activist also. Next up, we have Juliette De Villard, who's the co-founder of the London Climate Connection. She works at the nexus of climate innovation and communication, and in 2021, she founded London's largest climate networking community, so she's a good person to know, bringing together individuals passionate about climate and clean tech to spark ideas, discussions, and new connections. And previously, she supported the growth of climate startups at Greentown Labs and Activate in the US. And then last but not least, joining us from the US, we have Gillian Caldwell, who is the Chief Climate Officer and Deputy Assistant Administrator at USAID. She's responsible for directing and overseeing all climate and environment work across the agency, and previously she served as the CEO of Global Witness, which deploys investigations into corruption and natural resource extraction to drive systems change worldwide. So I think, can we just give them a round of applause, because they're certainly a lot busier than I am in their work. So yeah, I just wanted to start, because we are talking about storytelling today, to ask each of you to tell us a brief story, just about why you do your work, something that defines why you do your work from your childhood or maybe from your adulthood. Chai, can I start with you?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Chai Surui. I'm a little nervous because I'm learning English, but I think this is not a problem. I think when we are talking about the storytelling, the most important that you understand me. So if you don't understand me, just say me. Charlie, when we born indigenous people, indigenous person, we need to talk about the environmental. This is about our life. This is about our reality. But why I'm an activist? I tell you about the story about my mom and my father. They are activists too, and my mother always bring me to the protest, to the movement, and one time I just disappeared when I was 5 years, and she looking for me in the protest, and when she find me, I was in the front the protest with a microphone in my hand, and just saying about the kids' rights, So I think I'm always.
It comes naturally to you. Yeah.
Yes, I don't know, but yeah, when we born an indigenous person, we just born to the fight, and in this time, we need to fight more, because we are passing in Brazil the worst time in a long time ago.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Juliette, were you also to be found at the front of protests, or is...
Not quite, no. I grew up in Switzerland, so I'm a dual Swiss-British national, and I feel really blessed about that because it is a place of just extreme natural beauty, both because it naturally is that way, but because also it is one of the richest countries on earth, and it's had the ability to preserve that and really put in laws to protect that. And by growing up over there, to me, what was a huge part of my childhood was that nature. Was spending all of my free time, holidays, weekends, anytime I wasn't in school, my parents took me out into the nature in the mountains. And I never realized how much of an impact that had on me until much later in life when I started living in cities. And I went back 5 years ago, and I went and I did a mountaineering expedition with my dad, where we went up to one of the tallest peaks in Europe. And there's a place there, which if some of you have been to the Chamonix Valley, which is right at the intersection of Italy, Switzerland, and France, that is created for tourists, where you can go and explore glaciers, the beautiful scenery, and there's a staircase. And it's probably the least interesting thing you could think of. It's made of metal, it looks ugly, but if you start going down the staircase, I think that is, for probably most people who go there, one of the most impactful things you can do to realize just how much we're changing our world. Because the top of the staircase says level of the glacier in 1800s. And you keep going down, and every story, you've got the new date. Level of glacier in 1942. 30 meters below, level of the glacier in 1980s. And it's like walking through a building much taller than this one, and you realize truly how much ice has melted and how visually you can see that even on the mountains as well, with the empty rocks and the rubble that's around there. So I would say that's a story I think a lot about when I think about why I'm doing this work and the people that I work with, and why it's worth us continuing to work on these issues.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And did you, when you sort of came home from that trip, did you feel like a new fervor for the work that you did? Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, I would say a new fervor to go out and change it, but also like a new fear, a kind of understanding of how much we've already changed, that there's many things that are irreversible. You can't grow a glacier. We can stop doing more damage, but we're not going to be able to add more ice onto that. We're not going to be able to stop the fact that those mountains, if you go up them right now, you can hear them crumble.
Right.
Because the ice is melting inside those rocks. And things that used to be stable are now falling away. And that's things that we can never get back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true. And Gillian, finally, onto your story. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, in terms of how I got involved in the climate work, it's pretty straightforward. I heard what Al Gore had to say when they were filming An Inconvenient Truth back in the early 2000s, and I had a 2-year-old daughter on my hands, and I was just absolutely stunned into silence with the horror of what was, soon to begin unfolding. But, in terms of stories, because we're talking about storytelling and the power and potential of storytelling, I think what really convinced me of that was work I did back in the early 90s involving an undercover investigation into the Russian mafia's involvement in trafficking women for forced prostitution. And, we posed as foreign buyers and, pretended we wanted to purchase women to import them into the United States to get an insider's look on how this business works, and filmed those meetings with hidden cameras. And while it was well known that trafficking was taking place from various parts of the world, and it had been documented, especially with respect to Asia and Latin America, it really wasn't until we produced this film, which became sort of like, a clarion call for response, probably because we were talking about white women coming from an area of strategic interest to the United States, but the film and the coverage really kickstarted, legislative changes worldwide, and it convinced me that that stories are a tremendously powerful way to drive change.
Absolutely. And I feel like from the conversations we've had, for you, a lot of this work is about impact. It's about the storytelling, yes, but it's also about being able to see the tangible, active change afterwards. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I've been like your other panelists there doing change-oriented work for a lifetime. I'm unfortunately not interested in telling stories just because they're beautiful or interesting. It's all about driving change where I'm concerned.
Absolutely. And Chai, that moves us quite neatly, I think, onto your video work and the territory. And for people who don't know anything about the documentary, could you tell us just a little bit about the story that it tells about deforestation and so on and so forth?
We, I think it's very important we bring our narrative. For a long time, the colonizer are telling our story, and the territory we bring our story, bring our reality, and not just talking about deforestation. Or we are saying to you that deforestation is not only about the trees. When they go there in our lands and the invaders are there and put illegal cattle, they are threatening us too. And the world saw what's happened with Dom and Bruno. And this is not an isolated case. This is what's happening in all the indigenous land right now. And why needs happening, what's happening with Dom to the world, look to us, look to what is happening in the Amazon. And the territory, our film, bring this story, bring our reality, what's happened in the Amazon. And more than this, it's very important because us, the indigenous peoples, telling about our narrative, about our perspective, and I think this is very important because, when I go to the festivals, the people are more shocked when they discover that I'm a producer because they think I'm in the film. And I say, no, I'm a producer. And they are just shocked. And why? Why? It's because we need to change this. We need to change who are telling the stories.
Yeah. Absolutely, I agree with that. And so, how did the documentary come about? Did you have conversations with people to try and get it started, or how did it start? The territory.
The territory start with my husband.
Hey, husband.
Hi, husband. Alex Spritz is the director, and he is American. And he sent an email to my mother. My mother is in the territory. It's a brave activist, and Alex sent this email to her, and she asked to my husband that work with us, and have a mail here. It is English. You can answer to me, and the territory start like that. And because Gabriel, my husband, worked with us 7 years,
Wow.
and Alex go there and met my mom and met the Uruawau indigenous peoples. They are so brave. and because the rural indigenous land is the biggest indigenous land in my state, and we are talking about the Amazon, and is talking about the life, because without the Amazon, we don't have life. And you understand that. Because I always say, I'm not here to ask you to saving us. I'm here to say you, we are saving you, and you need helping us in this fight.
Absolutely. Yes. And so that collaboration is actually for more of our benefit than we perhaps realize, I think. Yeah, for sure. Juliette, I want to hear a bit more about your work at London Climate Connection. I know it's quite a new project for you. It started in 2021. Why did you decide to kick off and start a space where we could share stories and operate around climate in London?
Honestly, I came back to London in September. I'd lived in the United States for about 3 years and briefly kind of back home in Switzerland to visit the parents, but moved back and was really excited about meeting everybody who was working in climate, figuring out what are the next steps, what are the things that we need to build in this local community, in this country. And it was post-pandemic. It was right after things had started opening up, and I just couldn't find a central meeting place. There wasn't, at least at that point in time, anything going on. I was so blessed right now to have things like Climate Forward, the entirety of Climate Action Week, so many events that you couldn't possibly attend all of them even if you wanted to. But at least then, there wasn't anything going on in a regular way. And so given that there wasn't, myself and another person I met along the way called Hamish, my co-founder, decided that we'd create something. It wasn't meant to be an event series. It was going to be a one-off, just to get people together. But the number of people who told us after that, hey, please do this again, we need it on a regular basis, made us take that step of making it into this community and making it into this recurring event series.
Gorgeous. And you do a specific type of talks there, right? So the stories that people tell are like lightning talks. And how do you think that influences the type of climate stories that are told or, related to?
Yeah, so part of my background prior to London Climate Connection is working with scientists to help them tell their stories, whether that be for pitching to VCs or media appearances. And as a result of that, through the public speaking coaching that I do, which is one of the hats I wear, I've seen a lot of people who do very, very long speeches where half the audience falls asleep, or speeches that are more about selling you the thing that they care about but that nobody else in the room cares about. And so lightning talks was a concept that we came up with around keeping it short, having an idea that is you have to either inspire or teach. You can't normally step on stage and just sell your product or be here and give us a pitch. You have to go away, you have to give us a takeaway, something that new that we're walking out the room with today going, I know this much more about this climate topic. So that's the idea of that.
Wicked. And are there any, good examples you can think of from the past year of talks in terms of lightning talks that have really stayed with you in terms of the storytelling that they used or what they were trying to get across? I don't know.
Yeah, there was a talk a month and a half ago by a lady called Eleni. She works for a company called Sintali, which is a startup in the building space. And I think she really encapsulated what the purpose of a lightning talk was, and that she didn't even mention who she worked for in the entirety of the 7 minutes, which kudos to her. And she really talked about just how many issues there are within the building sector, but how, unlike with the rest of climate change and many of these other topics, we actually have solutions to all of them already. And we've had those solutions for 20 to 30 years. And so for her to stand there and tell that story and say, hey, look, here's all the data showing this. And in this issue, we can actually, right now, solve this if we put our heads to it and we give it the funding and we implement it and we convince those people. That was a really impactful talk, and I think one that really changed people's mindsets. We think of buildings as very clunky, and I think thanks to her, people stepped away going, actually, we can do something about this, and we already have the solutions.
Gorgeous, thank you. And on to you, Gillian. So I know that I feel like all three of you are kind of the beginnings of your story in various ways, and you're relatively new to USAID, is that correct? Yeah. And you've recently developed a communication strategy for them, which I guess maybe is one of the ways in which you're kind of operating in the storytelling space at the moment. Could you tell us a bit more about what your new role kind of consists of and how you're trying to bring storytelling effectively to the masses in such a kind of senior and what I guess could be a space, as we were kind of discussing, that could be quite hard for people to understand. How are you making it accessible and so on and so forth?
Well, the strategy I just was actually the climate strategy for the agency. So USAID is, the world's largest development agency. We've got 10,000 staff and a presence in 100 countries worldwide. And we're really launching a whole of agency response to try to tackle the climate crisis. And we've established some extremely ambitious targets for achievement between now and 2030, including reducing carbon emissions by 6 billion tons and protecting 100 million hectares of land and, catalyzing $150 billion climate-related finance. But the success of all of our work is really going to be very contingent on our ability to, to describe the work in ways that are compelling and to motivate the governments in the 100 countries where we work worldwide to act. And, just to give you one concrete example of, the kind of story I think we need to tell to catalyze the kind of finance that's necessary to deliver the solutions that are readily available all around us. I've been thinking a lot about adaptation because there's a lot of investment, private sector investment going into mitigation, but not as much into adaptation, which is, of course, critically necessary given the scope and scale of the impacts we're already seeing at, less than 1 degree global warming. Where adaptation is concerned, we have this really interesting intervention. It's a collaboration with NASA and other leading geospatial organizations. And we basically use geospatial data to be able to assess crop area and crop conditions and to predict forthcoming extreme weather events and drought, which can help smallholder farmers who are being so heavily impacted by the climate crisis to adapt and to figure out when to harvest. And even more importantly, from an investor perspective, these interventions have reduced the cost, say in Kenya, the data collection costs by 70%. So that, 5 years ago, there were only 900 farmers insured against crop loss. And today there's over 1.4 million insured farmers. So I think starting to make the possibilities visible so people actually understand what we're talking about when we describe a need for investment in adaptation is critically important.
Got you. And I think it's interesting when you're speaking, I'm thinking about, for you, because you're working at such a high level, like you're speaking about big figures, big numbers, incredibly sort of, to me, almost like mind-blowing projects that feel quite hard to grasp almost. How do you kind of make space for individual stories in the work that you do? How do you hold space for people to tell you what they need? And is that part of your work at USAID?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical anywhere. There's that old adage, something to the effect that, a million lives lost is a statistic and a single compelling story is a tragedy. And I think, it is so important to tell the stories of the impacts in ways that really feel personal and alive and human. But I think not just the impacts, because we're seeing them all around us and fewer people need convincing that we have a crisis on our hands. I think we need to start to do a better job of telling the stories of the solutions and the possibilities for change, because there's a degree of cynicism, which is really hard to stave off given the scope and scale of the crisis we're confronting. So I like to focus as much of our energy on talking about solutions and achievements and the possibilities of a different kind of world, the world we need to reinvent, as we do talking about the very drastic consequences we're confronting.
Absolutely. And Chai, have there been any successes in your life recently in terms of the work that you've been doing that we could maybe speak about? Like, have you found that with any of your advocacy or activism, there have been real, tangible, positive changes that you've seen in your local environment or in other Indigenous communities that you're associated with?
Yes, you speak a little fast,
Oh, sorry, I
but
apologize.
I think I understand what you say. Yes, I'm so positive things.
Yeah, exactly.
Because not only me, but we have other indigenous activists doing the same work and going to the other countries and other places, talking about our reality and come to here to European countries, to the USA, to talk about the como é que é agora mesmo que eu esqueci? Talk about the laws, and now we know that the Switzerland just promised that they don't will more buy gold from the indigenous land.
Okay.
And we know that this is because we are showing what's happening in the Amazon too.
Okay.
And
So just to make sure I've understood, so Switzerland are
yes,
no longer going to buy gold, is that right?
from the indigenous land.
Good.
Yes, and because you don't know what's happening in the Amazon. I'm sure you don't know about our reality, and I think come here, tell you about our genocide, about our families, about how our rivers are poisoning, and how they are destruction our lands, and say to you that you are part of this too. Because the gold, the meat, the leather is come to here. I think this is you are thinking about that, and this will you will do a positive things. I hope. I trust you. Please. So yes, and more than this, we are talking with a lot of people, and we can see that. I hope because our fight is about hope and resistance, and we are doing this with our bodies and with our lives, and I can see the things change. Maybe so slowly.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah,
at a time.
but yeah, I can see it.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like we have to hold on to hope, right? Or else we end up getting stuck in the mud. Julia, I know that you had interesting things to say also about this idea of call to actions and how we make sure our stories have perhaps expand beyond the spaces that we tell them within. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think addressing sort of hope and solutions as well. One of the things that I love the most about the work that I do with public speaking coaching is that most of the people I work with are those scientists who work specifically on startups that are commercializing technologies that will change the physical infrastructure of the world. So we're talking about things like new ways of doing geothermal, carbon capture, any kind of really impactful climate solution, for the most part, is not going to come from software and business. There are real physical changes that need to be made in how we build our world, how we move around our world, the chemicals, the food, everything that we use. And the people that I work with are people who are creating those solutions. And what's beautiful about that is that, on the one hand, I get to hear about them, and that's always a really beautiful, wonderful, hopeful moment for me. And the other piece is those people are creating something really valuable, But for the most part, they're actually some of the people who really have trouble telling their stories. Because if you've come from a scientific background, anyone in the audience, I think you can probably empathize with this, but data, the world of numbers, the world of reading things over and over again, it's often not the world of storytelling and hope. And so helping people to connect with their emotions in a way that allows them to bring out the impact of what they're doing, their personal connection to it, their story, how, their grandfathers were miners and were working on a different kind of issue to them, and hence now they're going forth themselves and looking at how you mine energy from the ground that is renewable rather than, oil and gas or gold, as it were, in that particular case, or a personal connection about, again, growing up in a certain location and how that location's affected by climate change. Those stories are the ones that actually help them raise the money that they need to create the solutions. It's not the technology itself when they talk about it. Obviously, you have to have good technology to raise the funding, but the thing that closes the deal, the thing that gets you in the room, the things that gets the people to remember is that emotion and their ability to connect with people who are not scientists, who are not going to understand the details beyond that.
Gorgeous. And Gillian, we're actually running out of time, so just one last question for you, maybe to finish us off. What would be, if you had a kind of call to action of some kind, or a solutions-oriented statement that you could share with the audience today, what would it be? What would your sort of message of hope or inspiration be for us on this sunny London day?
Well, I think it's important to reinforce what Chai Suri is trying to say here. Indigenous people are the very best stewards of carbon critical landscapes on the planet. And she's right when she says we need Indigenous communities to survive. And she's also right when she says that we can make a difference by virtue of the choices we make every day, not just in terms of who we put into office, but also in terms of the products we purchase, because commodity-driven deforestation is a primary driver of climate change. And, they are, as is, industrial agriculture and meat consumption. So, I think, supporting Indigenous communities, making sure that, we speak out when Indigenous community members are assassinated, as they are regularly, and voting with our wallets, so that we're not making choices that are driving, death and devastation in other parts of the world. It's critically important.
Gorgeous. I think that's a great message for us to all kind of interrogate and take home with us. And one thing that I've been thinking about while all three of you have been speaking is this idea that we are the stories we're told, that we kind of embody the stories that we're told. And yeah, I would love it if everyone were to kind of come away from today having really thought about the messages of our three speakers, and hopefully being able to tell some of their stories and pass them down to future generations when the time comes. We're now going to open up for questions. So I think that there is a mic wandering around over here. Please put your hand up and we'll come to you. We're going to take 3 questions at a time. So yeah, there's one person just here.
Hi, thank you very much. Gosia Brzezinsk. I'm a co-founder of BB Partners, which is advisory for change makers. What we do is actually tell stories of incredible change makers, people who are trying to deliver change to our societies. So it's so fantastic to hear your stories, Chai. Congratulations on doing a film. Only a producer knows how much work goes into something like this. My question to all of you is, we're in a room with New York Times, we're in a room full of journalists. Journalists can carry those stories, and they do. And it's great to see, New York Times committing so much of their important space in the newspaper to climate change stories, and we see other media outlets doing the same. But if you were to speak to a journalist today, what would you like them to carry? What kind of story would you like them to get to the audiences, to people who are reading those stories, to ensure that what you are telling us today goes further and beyond the audience gathered in this room?
Absolutely. Chai, do you want to start on that? It's a big question.
Yes. What the story I want to bring today? Okay. maybe I'm a young person, and I'm talking to you, but I'm talking with the young people too. And I would like to say to this youth that we are the last generation that can save the Amazon. And more than this, my friend said, you need support the indigenous fight. You need look to us because we are talking about our lives. And maybe you don't matter about what's happening in the Amazon, but I think you are matter about your life. And what are we are suffering, but this will affect you too. And we don't have more time, you know. Amazon is up almost point not return. And really, I don't know more what I can say, not only to you, but to the world, to what you still don't understand. Mm-hmm. To stop the promises, stop the speech, and go to the action. My message is, okay, join with us, the indigenous peoples, and go to the action, because we are in the front line in this fight. Mm-hmm. So, yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think what I hear from that in relation to your question, speaking as a journalist, is that we can do more to uplift Indigenous journalism. Chai was saying that just before this, she was writing a column for a Brazilian newspaper. So my responsibility now is to go find that column after I'm off the stage and read it and translate it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. Gillian, did you have any other thoughts on that particular question in terms of any messages that you'd want to get out to journalists from the New York Times who are here today?
Well, going back to this question of finance, I mean, estimates are that by 2030, we're going to need $3 to $5 trillion a year in investment in order to, address the adaptation and mitigation needs that are forthcoming, which is a 600% increase on what we've got right now. So the story I would like the journalists to be telling is about the critical importance of private investment in climate mitigation and adaptation. And I'd also like them to be talking about the role that USAID and other governments can play to provide concessional finance and first loss guarantees and other forms of funding that help set the stage to de-risk those investments, to invite the private sector in. And we especially need private sector investment in the least developed countries, in the places where USAID works, because most of the investment is going towards renewable energy in middle income countries and high income countries. And we've got to right that balance if we're going to get where we need to go as a global community.
Got you. Juliette, does that tally with any of the work you've done around clean tech or?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say I adore the work that you're doing, because it is telling the stories of hope that we need. And so what I would say to New York Times journalists and anyone else out there who's also a reporter is I would love for us to the extent that it's possible with business models, move away from the kind of reporting that is more focused on the tragedy, the urgency, etc., because we have a lot of those messages out there already, and instead tell those stories of hope, but close them with something that you can tell everyone who's reading that around how to find the people who is behind that story. How can they get in touch? How can they donate? How can they, sign a petition? Whatever it may be, just something to close it out so that we're not just learning about it, but you're actually pointing us towards something so that in that moment, when we feel it, when we're in the emotion of the story, we can take action as well.
Absolutely. Solutions-based journalism. We love it. Any other questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Is that a hand or is that just a face wipe? Okay.
Listing us, guys. Listing the indigenous peoples. And yes, support us. I think this is very important. You need to listen what we are saying, what our leaders are saying, and you need to support us too.
Absolutely. I heard of a amazing program about, I think they're called, maybe it's Healing Hands, I might be getting the name wrong, where they spent 400 hours with indigenous groups, kind of listening to what their solutions to the kind of climate crisis in their area were. And they created all these amazing programs off the back of that. I feel like you're nodding like you might have heard of it. But yeah, it's really cool and you should look it up. I'll try and get the accurate name at some point. Sorry, Simran, go ahead.
Hi, I had a quick question and a slight comment, I guess. A lot of the stories that I read affect me very deeply. And I know that for a lot of people in this room, this panel is going to affect them very deeply as well. And I feel like one of the struggles that exists is these incredible stories that you have sometimes don't translate into political action. And my question is really, how can we use these stories, and maybe Charlie, you can comment on this as well, how can we project and amplify the stories that you're telling right now so that there's tangible political action being made? Because we can see in the Amazon, in Brazil, that the politicians don't really care, and they're still, deforesting. They're still expanding illegal farming, and I just want to know, what do you think? How can stories really have that political impact and be a driver for political change, so that we can see action and we can see that your incredible stories are being translated into consequence and into positive impact on the global platform?
Absolutely. What a great question. And I think we're all thinking about that today in relation to America and the actions of the US Supreme Court. So yeah, really interested to hear thoughts on this. I might kick off with you, Gillian, if that's okay.
Well, I think I couldn't agree more that we need more political action. But I think what's really important to emphasize, and Shai Suri alluded to this as well, is that we need to get beyond promises and to action. If you look at what happened in COP26, massive net zero commitments, massive emissions reductions commitments, still not all that we need, but those commitments are continuing to be ratcheted up. And the big question is, will governments do what they've said they'll do? Will they move beyond promises to action? And that's why, the USAID climate strategy is so focused on supporting governments to deliver on their NDCs, or their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. What commitments have they made, and what can we do to provide the technical and financial support they need to deliver on them? Of course, our own country has its challenges with respect to meeting our commitments, given what's going on politically, the recent decision by the Supreme Court, which basically negated the ability of the Environmental Protection Agency to significantly curtail carbon emissions. I mean, we've all got our problems, but I think when we talk about political will, the focus has to be on moving from talk to action.
Thank you. Any additional comments from either of you?
When I'm here, I'm talking with the politicians, with you, with a lot of people, and everybody bring the fault to the other. The politicians, no, this is the company fault. The company fault, no, this is the government fault. And the government, no, this is the consumer fault. So who are continued destruction of the Amazon, if it's anybody's fault. And I think talk about the politics, I don't know, the word is, the pronunciation, you understand me? It's talk about everything. Everything it's about the politicians. And we need to ask and pressure them to do this work. And we need to change this too. Now in Brazil, we have a campaign to not just to change the president, but change the Congress too, because we need more indigenous candidates, indigenous women, black women in the Congress, because they will still, we will have the same solutions with the same people. We need different people, we need change this to have other solutions. But we need to understand that we have the power, you know, and to do this, to say to them, you need change, because they have afraid. We can do this, and they know they need change. They know, and yes, I don't know if you understand what I want to say.
I
But yes, we need to go to the action.
Thank you. We're at time. I'd say my 3 takeaways from that amazing discussion, thank you for your question, are that we need to move with care, we need to listen, and we need to act. Quite simple things, but actually quite huge things. But yeah, thank you so much to my panelists. Can we give them a massive round of applause?
Thank you.